And we're live. Welcome, everybody. Oh, how I missed you all. I know it's been some time since we've gone to do one of these live streams. As you all know, I've been busy, but I miss you all. I miss these live streams. I miss these interesting and important conversations. So we're back, and we actually have a few live streams scheduled for the next few weeks. So I'm really making an effort to have at least two a month, ideally one a week. One way to help that happen is if you want to come on stream, if you know somebody who'd be interested, reach out to me. Let's set it up. You can find my information in the description. And we're going to reactivate the Patreon because if we're already going to do streams, might as well get that Patreon support. So if you want to support the show, allowing us to do more content, you can find a link to that in the comments as well. Today we have a very interesting conversation. I'm happy to introduce a new friend who he goes by Robert of Canada. Now, just a little background before you introduce yourself, Robert. So, Robert reached out to me, wanting to talk about an idea called Islam for Europe, or is that
Islam for Europeans is the name of our organization.
Yeah. So initially, I thought it was similar to I don't know if you all remember, we had Claire on the program a few months back. She kind of wanted Islamic rule all over the West, and I figured it was another version of that. And I said, okay, let's go for it. But then once I better understood Robert's position, it actually seems to be a moderate position on how to better integrate Muslims into European society to allow them, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what I gathered, allow them to have, live freely and express themselves freely in Europe without causing a rise in Islamophobia or tension between Christian Europeans and Muslim Europeans. So I'm excited to explore this because I think this is creating a lot of tension in the West. I know a lot of Christian Europeans or atheist and agnostic Europeans are concerned about the rise of Islam in Europe, and many don't know what a good solution is. So it seems like, Robert, you might have one. So let's get started. You go by Robert of Canada, but your organization is Islam for Europeans. So how did that happen? Why not Islam for Canada? Tell me a little bit about your background and how you got here.
Yes. So first off, a bit about my history. I was born in a small town in southwestern Ontario, in an all-white town, basically. And my mom was white American. My dad was French Canadian. I was born and raised Catholic, but we weren't practicing very much. Went to a Catholic grade school and a Catholic high school, which is also 95% European. After I left high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. I worked for a pizza restaurant and stayed with my parents, so my life wasn't really going anywhere. I studied a lot of different religions, looking into the purpose of life and why we're here, what the meaning of it all is. And Christianity did not really appeal to me that much because it was kind of difficult to understand, the concept of the Trinity. It was hard for me to wrap around my head, the validity of the New Testament, and how the contradictions therein. And then when I studied Islam, I studied it for about 9 months on my own. I read the whole Quran, and then I ended up converting to Islam in 2003. And then for the next 20 years of my life, I was well integrated in many different Muslim communities. I was on the board to help out with several programs to try to integrate converts to Islam. My parents, alhamdulillah, praise be to God, they didn't have a problem with my conversion, so I was very fortunate in that regard. But once I saw that the programs to try to integrate converts weren't really working, even though the Muslim community was very warm and welcoming, they just didn't know what to do with us, basically. I entered university, did my degree in psychology from the University of Toronto, and then I ended up doing my master's degree in applied social psychology. And this is when, in 2015, I started to see the situation change in terms of the relationship between Islam vis-a-vis the West. When I first converted, 9/11 had just occurred, so there's a lot of anger, fear, and resentment towards the Muslim community. And when I entered into university, it was almost like a backlash to that among a portion of the Muslim youth, not all, But I could definitely see a schism, in terms of how the Muslim youth viewed the West, and Westerners. Half wanted to be integrated into Western society. They wanted, to present Islam as an alternative way of life. The other, and another segment, it's got into more of like a Marxist, kind of approach, kind of this kind of a victimology of being, oppressed Muslims in the West. And that really disheartened me because I thought I wanted to help integrate Muslims into the greater Canadian society, but also to look at it from the opposite point of view because I'm from from an all white community. Like I saw that liberalism is just, and degeneracy is really having a negative effect on on our whole way of life, really. So that's when it's kind of sparked the idea to join and eventually be the front man for Islam for Europeans. Until up until now, I've been the front man of that organization. We have a YouTube channel, Islam the number 4 Europeans, and my Twitter handle is Robert of Canada. So we want to look at it from several different angles. I know you have a lot of questions in that regard, Adar. So I'll leave it wide open for you. Go ahead.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for that background. Just a quick question about your personal journey. You said you learned initially Christianity, but it didn't quite make sense. It didn't quite land, and then you read Islam, and it was like, this is the truth. Can you kind of explain the difference, what you saw in the two texts, like what really was convincing about Islam that wasn't so convincing about Christianity?
Well, I know I don't want to turn this into a session to bash Christianity. I think that there are a lot of good things in the New Testament, and the teachings of Jesus, peace be upon him, that provided like a moral framework for the Christian West, to keep such a strong society for so long. Having said that, I think the letters of Paul, even the letters of Paul, didn't really gel theologically, even with the things that Jesus, peace be upon him, supposedly said. Many Paul's idea, and I'm sure many of your audience will agree with me on this. His idea was to reject the Torah and also to reject Jesus's and to have this idea of a Trinity, which is completely anathema, not just to the Old Testament, because the Old Testament is very clear that that there's only one God, that there's no partners, and there none is to be worshipped except He. It's basically the first commandment. Even the things that Jesus supposedly said in the New Testament, saying that He's the Son of Man, and several times over, and not the Son of God. That didn't gel with it, so it didn't make sense to me. But when I ran into Islam, it was a very clear, almost like a like a, I don't want to say it like a correction, but to say like these previous texts, they had their errors in them, because they were changed by man in part, but for the most part, you've got the right story. You both the Jews and the Christians were not far off at all. There is only one God, one unique creator that created the entire universe. He's the first and the last, the sustainer of everything. And the reason why he created us is basically just to worship him. And that worship takes so many different forms in Islam. So it was a very clear text. And on top of that, there are many things in the Quran that from a scientific standpoint were very accurate, and also from a historical standpoint. So when I read it, I'm just looking at it from a totally objective point of view. I didn't think it was possible in any way that Muhammad, peace be upon him, could have written this Quran himself. They're just the victory of the Romans over the Persians, the fact that the Dead Sea is the lowest point on earth, the creation of the formation of the embryo in the mother's womb. These are things that are just like, wow, this is amazing. This can't be from a human being. So to me, it felt like it was the culmination of the previous texts, without a complete rejection of it. So that, in short, is why some of the reasons why I converted to Islam. So
Cool, thank you.
yeah.
Before we continue, so whoever's viewing chat, feel free to let us know where in the world you're tuning in from, and also feel free to drop questions because we will get to Q&A at the end. So yeah, the goal of this conversation is not to it's not so much a theological conversation as to my more agnostic views to your Muslim views, but
Sure.
so I'm not going to push back on anything.
Yeah.
I accept your belief for what it is. Um, you know, to me, it seems like faith in a creator or in one of the many thousands of different belief systems that exist. They certainly provide value for humans who believe in them. And my goal is to contribute to a world that has people being as happy and healthy as possible, people living meaningful and prosperous lives. And it seems like faith is a very important key to achieving that.
Mm.
So my personal beliefs and how I view religion and God actually is irrelevant to many conversations because I respect people's uh, not only respect, I recognize it to be important for human flourishing. So if somebody has a belief system that elevates them, wonderful. I support that. Where I'm more likely to come out and speak is if they use their belief system to cause harm to others, or they justify bad action through a belief system. Then I feel like we have a moral obligation to speak up against it. But as long as people's belief and faith is making them a better person, great. We need a world filled with as many good people as possible. So
Yeah.
um, yeah.
Absolutely.
So with that, I am very interested in hearing like what. Islam for Europeans is all about because I do think Europe is facing a challenge. I think there's an increasing divide of two distinct populations, and that's like traditional European populations. I don't even want to say native born because many of the Muslims are now native born, but they're maybe first or second or third generation. But there's a divide between the Muslim community that are a little bit more traditional in their beliefs, and then what is generally seen as a European whose faith is Christian, but in their practice, they're more atheist than anything else. They're primarily liberal. This divide is becoming more and more clear as the years go on. We're seeing now violence in France that seems to be somewhat related to this, and you know, I am not going to say I'm hopeless, but I don't have a clear vision of what we can do to create a more unified Europe. So I'd love to hear from you, your thoughts and how you go about that.
Well, let's roll it back quite a bit. When we take these approaches and these ideas, we're not pulling. We always look back to like the Islamic text. I know I don't want to turn this into a theological discussion, but there's this concept in Islam called urf, or which generally translates to culture, or the customs of the people. So one of the well-known tenet, well, not well-known, but this is actually a tenet in Islamic belief, that when a new people embraces the faith of Islam, there are acts of worship that they must perform. There are things that they had to abstain from, but in terms of the cuisine, the dress, the architecture, the ways of doing anything that's not specifically related to religion, they're supposed to keep. And like it's and this goes all the way back to when Islam first originally started. It was started in the Arabian Peninsula. Like many of the Islamic customs that we see now were also traditionally Arab customs. So this was not as big of a shock to the people. So when Islam spread throughout the world, you saw this synthesis of the local culture to the newly converted Muslims, in which they were practicing Muslims, but at the same time, it took on the cultural flavor of the people. So, for instance, when the original Muslims, when they came to the Holy Land, Bilad Sham, Syria, Jordan, the Holy Land there. They completely transformed themselves. So they preached Islam as the religion. Omar became, peace, may Allah be pleased with him, became like the leader of the of the Holy Land of Jerusalem. But when Muslims migrated from Mecca, Medina to Jerusalem, they noticed that the Muslims who were living there now look completely different. They didn't look like the Arabs of the Arabian Peninsula. They changed the way they dressed. They changed the way they ate. And even the person who was ruling over at that time, he dressed very extravagantly. He had this like huge, he didn't look like a leader from the Arabian. Leaders in the Arabian Peninsula. They lived a very simple lifestyle. They slept under a tree, and they were confused by how he was acting. And they asked him, why do you have all this extravagance? As the new leader of Jerusalem. He said, well, if I don't have all this pomp and circumstance, then the people aren't going to take me seriously because that's what they're used to here. Right. So what I'm trying to get out of this is that, Islam was always very careful to take into account the customs of the people. And this would just happen naturally just because, migration was very sparse. When it was very common for the newly converted Muslims in that population to supersede the Muslims who had migrated there. And they just practiced Islam, but in terms of their culture, they were, culturally from that particular region. So another example is Spain. A lot of people think that, it's a common narrative from the anti-Islam faction of the right that, like the people who conquered Spain during the Andalus period were all Arabs. And also you hear, kind of Arab supremacists will kind of say this, but it's actually untrue. The vast majority of Muslims who were living in Spain when it was under Muslim rule were native Iberians. So, like I think in one account in Granada, almost the entire population was native Spaniards. So when you look at like the architecture of Spain, it takes on a European style architecture. So, but the problem is, as you stated, now when we come to Muslims in the 21st century, the vast majority of them are coming from other countries. So there's kind of this, in addition to the fact that Islam is seen as something foreign, it's a different religion, it's associated with terrorism. On top of that, there's like this cultural barrier as well, where like these people are coming from a totally different culture with a totally different cuisine style, dress, family relations and stuff. So when someone converts to Islam, it's almost like you have no choice but to assimilate into a different culture. And I don't think Muslims really understood the harm that this did over time. So what we're suggesting is that when people do convert to Islam, that the Muslims of that, the Muslims who come from other countries, or maybe their first or second gen, should advise the converts to collectivize and gel into a sub community. Collectivize, and that way their people will see that these people are Muslim, but they're also returning back to their traditional cultures in terms of the dress, the cuisine, the architecture, the slang. So in this way, it's kind of a win-win because I know I'm going a bit over time here, but to put it briefly, the converts, it's a win for them because it helps them get acclimated better to the Muslim community. They have a group they can gel with that can actually reach out to their families, or at least give them the best advice on how to deal with their families. Whereas, people born into Muslim families don't really know how to handle those situations. It is a bulwark against liberalism because, a lot of, Europeans see that liberalism is having a negative effect on their society. It's lowering their birth rates. And, if Europeans are converting to Islam and collectivizing, that they would just simply marry each other instead of having to marry into a Muslim family, and that thus would increase the total fertility rate, which would, I guess, work against the idea coming from the right saying that, Islam is here to take over the culture of the society. So that's basically the gist of what we're proposing. And this doesn't just go for Europe, but any country in which Muslims are living there, in any non-Muslim country as a minority, whether that's Japan or Korea or Bolivia or Thailand, allow the converts from that area to collectivize and gel into a community of Muslims. And then that way it will show their people basically that Islam is adaptable to any culture. So
interesting. So would you say that this movement, would you call it a movement or an organization or both?
Well, I would call it an organization because we're starting at the conceptual level. I think up until now, when you talk to Muslims, a lot of people don't even realize that this problem exists. And I think that's because usually people who convert to Islam and join a Muslim community, that's a different kettle of fish because regular Westerners, especially white Westerners, even if they're interested in Islam, it's an enormous jump for them to convert to Islam, because especially if their family is going to have a negative reaction to it, that's going to prevent them from A, converting to Islam in the first place, and B, converting and then afterwards joining an existent Muslim community. So
I
that's sort of
understand.
siphoned off most regular Westerners, leaving only the converts who don't have any trouble with their families converting and joining a Muslim community. So it's kind of like a selection bias.
Right.
So
Oh,
even if you were to pull like converts who, you know, already integrated members or assimilated members of an existing Muslim community, they'll say, yeah, what's the problem? But, you know, what's really happening is that a lot of these other people who may be interested in Islam,
mm.
there's no place for them to go, and they don't want to give up their European culture. So they're caught between a rock and a hard place, basically.
Interesting. So, so this I didn't realize. So your organization is actually focused primarily on converts and how to help converts have their communities within Europe. Because right now, if you want to convert, it's not just changing your religion; it's changing your culture and joining a culture that is primarily Arabic, or maybe in many instances in Europe also African culture, because a lot of the Muslims there are African. So this whole idea is to allow Islamic converts to remain European in their culture. And the idea is that this will help the converts on one hand, but it will also help essentially act as a bridge between Christian Europeans and Middle Eastern Europeans who are now, or Middle Easterners who are now European, and they could kind of bridge the divide between them. Is that like the general idea?
In a nutshell, you know, and like I said, it's a win-win because you know, the existing Muslim communities in Europe, um, you know, there's a lot of fear, resentment, and two-way anger between them and Europeans. And if, you know, the majority of Muslims, you know, who were born, you know, from other cultures, supported this idea, then, you know, you don't have to do anything. You know, you don't have to, you know, even try to reach out to their families. Just the basic fact that you're supporting it in spirit, that would be, I think, a really good olive branch to show, you know, the existing European countries that, you know, that we do care about people's cultures. That, you know, Islam is a universal religion for all cultures. You know, and again, we're not talking about complete division. I mean, like European converts, they can still, you know, give salam to, you know, other Muslims on the street. They can still, you'll still see us at Friday prayer, you know, and Eid prayer. But if we had our own kind of sub community, and the way that a lot of Muslims have already done themselves, you know, that would be a bridge and basically a bargaining chip that existing European Muslims can use, you know, for the safety and security of Muslims currently living in the West. So,
And do you know what percent of European Muslims are converts?
well, I know in the United States, and this shocks everybody. The ISPU is basically a polling organization in the United States. There's Muslims who work for it, and they poll Muslim Americans. So I know in the United States, this is crazy, but whenever they do a poll on Muslim Americans, 20% of of Muslims who are polled identify as white. And there's even an option for Arab, and they still put white. So what I,
Interesting.
what the I don't know what the exact numbers are, but I think that there's a silent minority of white people who do consider themselves Muslim,
Right.
but they just don't. You know, many of them don't feel like they can gel within an existing Muslim community. So when it comes to
Mm.
Europe, I don't know. You know, I wouldn't be able to even venture a guess. The other problem is that we're really lacking in any type of data. Muslim communities don't really do like solid research on like just even like demographic numbers or even just attitudes towards Muslims and Islam or vice versa. So that's another thing that we want to do is, you know, get some really good data we can use to make inferences instead of, you know, going off of the few trolls that exist on social
Right.
media. So,
Right. You know, this is interesting. It's definitely an angle. You know, you don't know what you don't know, and it in Islamic convert integration is not something that ever even crossed my mind. So this is a whole new idea I'm introduced to. I actually, you know, I think it's a commendable cause. I'm not so hopeful that this moves the needle in terms of like better integrating Middle Eastern and African migrants into European society, primarily because there's just, and again, we don't know the exact number, but the amount of the amount of Europeans that are Muslim that are like white Europeans is a few percent at most.
Yeah.
Um, so it doesn't seem like they would have so much influence over the greater Muslim community living in Europe. So I definitely think you're offering a good solution to converts. It doesn't, and again, that seems to be your primary focus. So that seems to be what you're focused on. I'm on a personal level more interested in how do we create a more unified society, and I'm still,
Well,
I'm still unsure of that.
yeah, I mean that's kind of a different topic, and it's a very controversial one. So, my main focus is, what you described, like helping converts integrate into, and gel into, eventually integrate into the greater Muslim community as a collective group. When you're talking about the migration crisis, the way I look at it is that it needs to be reframed as like a humanitarian issue that takes into account all people who have been all the people coming from Muslim and African countries who have been affected by war, famine, oppressive governments. That's kind of like precipitated, the crisis, and like, and existing Muslim countries like Turkey and Egypt and Jordan, they can only take in so many refugees, and that's kind of created this spillover into Europe. So, the way that the right, looks at this crisis, they take a very like, I don't want to swear on your channel, but a GTFO approach.
You could swear. We allow swearing on the channel.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, the initials will suffice.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I got it.
so I think that needs to be kind of reframed, because when you look at how expensive it is to take in even a small number of refugees, and like in terms of like the amount of funding that to get them into Europe, it's extremely expensive, and
Mm.
like again, they have no place to go. So what's happening is that a lot of these existing refugee areas in Turkey, Jordan, Syria are running on shoestring budgets, and there's people dying there like every day. So you can take a portion of that money and help fund those existing refugee areas to help, which just from like a numbers perspective, would have a like save thousands of lives, and it would, it wouldn't necessitate so many people needing to go to Europe in the first place. But the thing is, it's such a sensitive topic that it's not really our main focus. And I think when you talk to many Muslims personally, especially conservative ones, they're saying that like it's not so much that that this migration crisis is happening, is that these people, their countries have been kind of decimated, and like they're in desperate situations, and if the right really wants to um, if they're really worried about demographics, they should advocate for positions that help restabilize these countries. Now, you can do that without, taking the whole like, controversial, repatriation approach. I think for Muslims to support an idea like Islam for Europeans, they can use it as a bargaining chip for Muslims of non-European origin currently living in Europe. Uh, because theoretically speaking, if you allow this subcommunity to grow from the ground up, then at the very worst, or at the very least, Islam would have a net neutral effect on the European birth rate, because you'd have two equally sized communities growing at the same time. So that's these are very tough, controversial questions, Adar. I don't really like to get into it that much.
Hmm.
But if I was a leader of a party, this is what I would take an approach to. But at this point, like you said, there's so much tension between Muslims and Christians, and indigenous Europeans. It's reaching an absolute fever pitch. So
Right.
at least I'm proposing this idea. Some think tanks, they have no idea what to do with this situation. It's incredibly bad. But
Mm,
if I were to propose something in a book that a party could say, okay, we can take this approach, that you don't have to put anyone into pogroms, we don't have to, you know, forcibly repatriate anybody, but taking this balanced approach, it would be a win-win for both sides. So
okay, cool. Thanks for sharing that perspective. Yeah, I don't have much of a solution either, but I do think that we definitely need governments to step in and build some kind of start to build more of a shared culture. Um, whether it's playing more sports together, whether it's integrating schools and neighborhoods to a larger extent. I know there is some issue with radicalization in some communities. Uh, the issue of the concept of de-radicalization is up and coming, and I know there's some de-radicalization centers in Europe. I think primarily Germany. It would be interesting to better understand how that works and what's the impact of that. But I think we need to try everything. And I have a similar approach to Israel Palestine or Palestinian citizens of Israel. How we integrate them better within Jewish society. Um, we need to do everything uh, in our power to integrate the society peacefully, because if we can't do peacefully, then violence is a natural result, and that's my greatest concern. So um, cool. And anybody who is contributing in one way or another, I support. So thanks for that, Robert.
mhm.
We do have some audience questions, so let's
Sure.
so just and this one was addressed to me. Was the violence limited to Muslim populations? It seems broad amongst the poorer communities. This was in reference to me saying that there's some violence now in France. So just then, I admittedly have not looked deeply into this. I know that opposed to other protests in France, this one does not include like a mass movement of the white working class like there's been in other protests. It seems like this is primarily migrant led, which I think is majority Muslim, but maybe not exclusively Muslim. Robert, if you know something else, or if someone in the audience, feel free to correct me, but that's my understanding of the current
Yeah,
violence.
they're not exclusively Muslim. So yeah, like you said, it's mostly the not just the not necessarily the migrant population, but a lot of them are even second generation. So I mean, the non-white population of France, they've always kind of felt like they're like a marginalized, oppressed member of the French community, not really fully integrated, and that kind of mutual animosity has boiled over time. And like that then the riots just came to a fever pitch, and from an Islamic perspective, I mean, like the destruction and looting and stealing. I mean, these are things that are completely forbidden within Islam.
Mm,
So there's some factions of the right who are saying that this is due to Islam, which I think is ridiculous. I mean, like no, any conservative Muslim or like Muslim with any type of knowledge can tell you straight up that this type of behavior is unacceptable. Um, when you look at underlying causes, I mean, this is history that goes way back. I mean, the French, they ended up colonizing Algeria for a very long time, and they'll say that the reason why we did that is because of there were Barbary pirates were enslaving Europeans for such a long time. Whatever the case might be, this is like something that goes way back, and there were atrocities that occurred, near the end of the French occupation of Algeria, between the Pieds Noirs, the French in Algeria, and the native Algerians, that resulted in like a massacre of their people. Now, the way I look at that is that I differentiate between what the Pieds Noirs did in Algeria and the French public, because the French public largely had no idea that these atrocities were taking place until Le Monde, the newspaper, reported on them. And once that happened, then the French people started to turn in favor of Algerian independence. So that's my take on it. I don't blame the French people for what happened in Algeria, especially today. I mean, like in Islam, we don't believe in collective guilt or collective punishment. People are responsible for their own actions. So that's like how I look at the situation. But it's clear that there's always been existing tensions between the native French population and the migrant population in France. So
Hmm. Cool. Thank you. Yeah, and now there's a bunch of comments, just people who are not fans of Islam, we could put it lightly.
let
Or,
me have it, or I'll try to answer it as best I
well,
can.
yeah, there's just a lot, so I'm gonna try to summarize it and put it in one question. But the concern is, like, given um, the radical views of many Muslims, even living in the West, for example, the idea that apostates should be killed, um, the idea that the plan for Islamic rule in Europe, the general idea of jihad, are things that are concerning many Westerners when they see increase in Muslim populations. What do you think we can tell these people to make them feel better about the situation, or are they rightfully concerned?
Well, I could take these questions one by one. So when it goes to the apostasy issue. So first of all, Muslims living in a non-Muslim country, and this is the consensus of Islamic scholarship, that you have to abide by the laws of the land. There's a verse in the Quran, more than one, that says that Surah 23, the beginning, verses of Surah 23, successful are the believers, those who always maintain their trusts and covenants. So when you are a Muslim and you have a covenant or a contract with a person or a nation, you have to hold true to that contract. So Muslims living in a non-Muslim country, when they took on citizenship, they took an oath that they're going to abide by the laws of the land, right? So when you're breaking the laws of that land, you are disobeying God. You're disobeying Allah. So even if you're breaking the speed limit, you're disobeying God in that respect. That doesn't mean you have to partake in all the things that they do in Western society that are against their religion, like drinking alcohol or doing drugs. But as a general rule, we can apply Sharia law, in a place where it's not even we have a completely different set of laws, right? So the idea of punishing an apostate, even in the West, that doesn't hold water in that respect. On top of that, even if you're in a Muslim country, you Islam is against vigilantism. So like there's a verse in the Quran: "Do not kill." That's what's a major sin in Islam, except by way of justice of the law. So there are some grave circumstances, in Islam that in which the punishment is capital punishment. But first of all, A, that would have to be in a Muslim country where Islamic laws are applied. And B, you can't just do that yourself. There has to be a court of justice. So you can't go out, and as a vigilante and kill whoever you think is guilty. That's completely against Islamic teachings also. So when it comes to apostates, then on top of that, the whole, there's many Islamic opinions on apostasy. And there's one opinion that apostates should be killed. That's one opinion. There's another opinion that it's not that clear cut. So when the whole reason why this was implemented at the time during the Prophet's time was because the Muslims were at war with the pagans. It was a do or die situation. The pagans are going to completely wipe the Muslims off the map. And leaving Islam meant leaving Islam, the religion, and joining the enemy, right? So there were other instances in which people converted out of Islam, but they weren't in a war type situation. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he let them go, right? So that's well documented. So the ones who are very knowledgeable on this, whether they're Salafi or not, they understand that this is on a case by case basis, and it would have to be in a Muslim country, and there would have to go through a court of law. But the idea that that Muslims can go killing whoever willy-nilly in a non-Muslim country, this is completely against Islamic teachings, and the best remedy for that is better Islamic education. So
Okay. So in your opinion, that those who hold these beliefs are actually just not following Islam the way it should be followed, which might um, like present Islam in a better light than many currently see it, but it might not make them feel more comfortable about the current views of the population. Because there's one thing of like how something should be believed in practice, and then how it's actually believed in reality. And I think that's kind of what people here are concerned with. It's not that they're not reading the Quran and saying this is concerning to me. They're hearing views of Muslims and saying this is concerning to me. So,
Yeah, that's a
eh,
legitimate fear. I mean,
yeah,
then, and if that's the case, then the solution is better Islamic education,
right,
right?
okay.
So yeah, that's my take on it.
Yeah, so just yesterday, Andrew Tate, which I know he's not like some representative of Muslims, or he shouldn't be, but I guess there's going to be this new mosque. Somebody tweeted, Muslim billionaire wins permission to turn one of London's most famous landmarks into a mosque. And then Andrew Tate retweets, this building is literally dead center in the middle of London's historic center. Amazing news. The only alternative to Islam for Brits are pride flags, as they no longer have any innate culture of patriotism. Allah is the best of planners, and I look forward to seeing the Islamic Republic of Great Britain in her final form.
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah, Britain will be fully
So
Islamic soon. So when, you know,
I know.
that's, yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it's there's a thing called tact. I mean, like something that we should be taking into account the sensitivities of the people. And I think part of the reason why this is Adar is because, you know, because social media is so huge. That's where people base all their opinions of what people think about things, right? And that's really accelerationist. It's really dangerous. And I think in general, what's happening is that amongst European populations or Western populations, the people who really have it in for Islam, like the most anti-Islam faction of the right, those are the people who usually troll Muslims online, on social media, and vice versa. They attract each other like magnets. Where there's another huge, significant percent of the population that couldn't care either way. I mean, they're neutral on the subject, and even some people on the right who have a lot of respect for Islam as a religion. But the thing is, those people don't normally go on social media, so it's kind of this like availability bias where, if you're a Muslim on social media, you're only going to see the people who have it in for Islam, and vice versa. I mean, like, if you're a non-Muslim Westerner and the only tweets you see are from Andrew Tate, you're going to think that Andrew Tate, what he says is like dogma, and it's like the official Islamic position.
right,
Uh, so it's a giant mess. I understand that like I am trying to put my finger on a giant dam that's ready to burst. But at the very least, I'm glad that we actually exist as an organization, because an organization like Islam for Europeans should have existed years ago. But I guess no one ever thought of coming to the conclusion that we would need something like this. So my take on the church is that, in general, if you have an abandoned church or an abandoned building that takes on the local architecture, that's better than having the building be demolished and having a Starbucks or a strip club being put up in its place. It's
hmm,
better to turn it into a mosque. But when it comes to like a culturally sensitive monument such as this, I think it's important to take into account the sensitivities of the people.
right,
um, like, just as another example, you don't even need people don't understand people don't you don't even need minarets to have a mosque. A lot of people think that you need a minaret and a dome to have a mosque. A mosque can be in any shape. Like there was a mosque that was made out of an old bowling alley in Dearborn.
hmm,
So there's no set shape. And I think the fact that we're using these as kind of like an own like the anti-Islam right is just fanning the flames of anti-Islam sentiment in the West.
right, right, right. Not a tactful move.
No,
Well, I hope that your voice is amplified, and that you become one of the leading voices for Islam, because I think that would
inshallah.
definitely help the situation. Um, we have a few minutes left. There's one topic that I guess we'll open it. We might not go deep, just because of time, but you said two things that got me to understand that one of the reasons why what led you to Islam, or why you view it as a good belief system, is because you view it as a solution to what you described as the degeneracy in the West, or the degeneracy of liberalism, which also
Mhm.
leads to a lowering of birth rate. Um, so I think I know what you're describing when you say degeneracy, but can you speak more on that?
I mean, any type of, lifestyle or action that, causes harm, not just to yourself, but, to the family structure and, the community at large. Alcohol abuse, drug abuse, prostitution, gambling, pornography, like, things that are just, breaking, like, breaking down the family structure, it's leading to, like, higher divorce rates and higher illegitimacy rates, like multiple sexual partners. Islam, has, like, strict guidelines on these matters, but at the same time, people don't realize that Islam can be very merciful, especially, God's view on the believers, because we all make mistakes. We're human beings. If
Hmm.
we were to be perfect creatures, in one narration, God would destroy us and then put another people in our place that would sin and then repent. So, like, we're basically made imperfect. I mean, Adam, the first man, peace be upon him, he and Eve, they sinned, they transgressed towards God. It was both their fault, but God both forgave them. That's one difference that in which Islam is different than, the Judeo-Christian belief of Adam and Eve, and that, this is simply a parable. It's not. There's no original sin in Islam, and, once you convert to Islam, all of your previous sins are forgiven. You get a clean slate, uh, and, that's, and, you just try the best that you can. Be sincere in your belief, and, inshallah, God will look to you, with light on the day of judgment. I don't know if you want to take up the question of, Islam for Europeans and, anti-Semitism, or, my pitch, I guess, to the Jewish community on this
Yeah,
concept,
I
or.
just want to make one point on that, because it's a topic I've really been reflecting on. We're seeing like two distinct, like, cultural movements happening in the West, and one of them is like this, what's been come to known as wokeness, or just the woke social justice movement, and the other is like a red pill movement, which is its mirror version on the right. And it
Yeah.
seems like these two movements are responding to one another. And what a lot of the red pillars describe, and one of the reasons many on that of that belief system, or in that camp, they're latching onto religion, is because they view the religion of liberalism as leading to the destruction of the family, substance abuse, and
Mm,
all these other issues. I kind of want to give a different perspective. Um, I think there's truth to what they're getting at, but I don't think it's inherently liberalism. I think what we're seeing, and it's multifaceted. We often try to simplify the cause for certain problems, and we generally tend to attribute it to an ideology we're in opposition to. So, for example, um, you know, a socialist would say the problems are a result of capitalism. A feminist might
mm,
describe the problems as coming from patriarchy.
mm,
A black rights activist might say it's white supremacy, right? Everybody has their boogeyman and what they attribute the problem to. And I understand why that happens. It's just way too complicated for us to
mm,
summarize in a few words. So we tend for simplicity and find a boogeyman that's in opposition to our ideology. So I think in this instance, what's happened is it's almost like either what the boogeyman is the idea of liberalism, and that helps bolster conservatism, or it's blamed on atheism, which just bolsters theism. But I think you could have both those things and still have a beautiful society. The question is what actually is missing from societies that become more liberal and more atheist. And if we could find solution to that, then you could actually have liberalism, which I think optimizes for human freedom, but does not optimize for community and the collective, right? So how do you have both? And this is something that I think about a lot, and really what I do on the day to day in the company and community I'm building, Grateful Giraffes. But it's really all about, and it's a cutesy name, but there's really a lot of depth to what we're trying to achieve here. But the whole idea is to really give people community, uh, based on certain values, right? And which sounds like religion, but the values here are more universal humanist values that most religious people would agree with, like the idea that gratitude's important, that it's important to be compassionate, that we should strive to be happy and healthy individuals, right? These are like universal values that atheists and Muslims could agree on, and that we could have as these shared values and build community together around. So I just, while I would agree that we have a lot of problems in the West, and I think a lot of them are maybe not caused by liberalism and atheism, but correlated strongly to liberalism and atheism. I think that the reason for it really comes down to lack of community, lack of meaning, lack of belief in something greater than oneself. But I think all that can actually be solved, uh, without needing to move away from liberalism or moving towards some theistic religion. That being said, that's not a slight to conservatism or theism. If that works for you, it works for you. I just want us to live in a society with a plurality of different belief systems where we could all, uh, you know, have our beliefs and respect each other's right to believe different things and live in a beautiful society together. So that's just how I would frame it personally.
Yeah, well said, Adar. I mean, like, as Muslims, we're not opposed to, people living, whatever lifestyle they want. We believe that, we have a lifestyle that, will be the best for people to follow. Having said that, I mean, if people want to have their own worldview and their own religion and their own way of life, who are we to force people into that? I mean, you can't force someone to convert to Islam, even if you're living in a Muslim country or theoretical Muslim state. You cannot force people into like an Islamic way, a way of life, right? So, but I get what you're saying. I don't think that, and I have my own critiques of the red pill movement as well. I think that Pearl, for example, goes way overboard.
I
And
don't even know. I was actually thinking of doing a video reviewing her stuff. It doesn't even seem like she's serious, or she's not quite well.
well,
I'm
I
not.
think,
Yeah,
yeah, I
I don't
think
know.
it. What's missing is that in Islam, places a great and high status on motherhood, and one of the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad is, paradise lies at the feet of your mother.
Mm,
So being best to your mother is like, even more being good both your parents is extremely important, but especially one's mother. So I think that's really missing from their equation. And like when it comes to brother Andrew, I think from the get-go I advise in one of my videos that like what he needs is like Islam 101. He needs to take some time off and just learn the basics of his religion, because if he has this enormous platform and he's going to say stuff that's going to like in the end be harmful to himself and not just others.
right, right, right.
I think Dave Chappelle did it best when he took some time off for that. But I think we're 53 minutes in. Dar, did you want me to address I guess Islam and vis-a-vis like the Islam for Europeans vis-a-vis the Jewish community, or
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's wrap it up on that. And then I'm also gonna, we have a Discord server where we sometimes do these after parties. We actually haven't done one in a while, but if you're interested, I will need a run. But if you're interested in hopping in Discord and chatting to community members, I'm sure some of them would like to ask questions and just engage.
okay. Yeah, so yeah, sure, I wouldn't mind doing that. So
Cool.
um when I've been running Islam for Europeans for quite a while, and this something I've been thinking over and mulling over, and that is the fact that inherent in this whole like different approach to like bridging the gap between Islam and the West, the I guess where does the Jewish community fit in? Because on the surface, it like may look at this approach and you might balk and think like, well, there's people who don't like who are anti-Semites on one end and on the other end, and this would be Islam for Europeans would be like them joining, which would create a lot of fear, I'm assuming. but that's not what we're about. I mean, we stick to our principles as Muslims. So first and foremost, I know that there's been a lot of tension between uh, Jews and European Christians throughout history. That track record is much better between European Muslims and Jews. I mean, like Bosnia has a Jewish community. I think Sarajevo is the only city in Europe that has a mosque, a synagogue, a Catholic church, and an Orthodox church. Albanian Jews were saved by Muslims during World War II. So there's that. In general, I would say, Islam as a religion is more compatible, theologically speaking, with Judaism than Christianity would be, in terms of our thoughts on monotheism. The similar practices, the similar language. So that's another take on it. So I guess what I'm saying is that you know, you know, if even a portion of the Jewish community would be like, you know what, this is a good idea. This is sort of like a release valve uh, against this, not just Islamophobia, but anti-Semitism. Because if we take this position that European Muslims should collectivize into subcommunities throughout the West, then it deflates the argument that Islam has a deleterious effect on that. We want these cultures to die out. That it is that like Islam has something to offer because we want to celebrate the diversity of mankind. But the best way to do that is to have people to have, I guess, out and still communicate with others at the same time. So I know it's a controversial subject, but I was just mulling it over, and I thought, what, maybe it is a good idea, and Europeans would be like, wow, I guess this would not only be a solution to anti-Islam sentiment, but even if a portion of the Jewish community would take this approach, then it would they would say we really do care about everyone keeping their identity of their ancestors. So I don't know. Does that make sense or?
Yeah. Yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean, it's all new concepts that I need to think about, but
yeah,
generally speaking, it's a reasonable approach. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I don't know. Did you have any other questions you wanted me to answer on the chat, Adar? Or
No, no, a lot of it is just in the not fan of Muslim camp.
Well, what was some of the other questions they had? Yeah, Muslims are selling Islamic law. I mean, we're such a small percentage of the population. I mean, like, we can never act as a fifth column. I mean, even when the original Muslims were fled to what is now present-day Ethiopia, they lived within a largely Christian society. They abided by the laws of the land, and they never became a fifth column to Ethiopia. And even when you had Muslims, in spreading, when Islam spread throughout, the Middle East and North Africa and Asia, there were still largely non-Muslim populations living there.
Mm.
Like, it was never a forced belief on people. I mean, I'm not saying it was all rosy. Of course, there's always going to be, black moments, like dark moments in history, when you look at Islamic history. But, like I said, the best solution to that is better Islamic education. So.
Okay, cool. I think that's a good place to end it. Better Islamic education. Um, awesome, Robert. Thanks for the time. If you all want to continue, we will have an after party in Discord. I just dropped a link in the chat. You go to that link. You then, on the left-hand side, you'll see it says lounge. Click lounge, and you'll be connected via voice. You can turn your video on if you'd like, but it's an opportunity to connect to the after party. And Robert, thank you again. Viewers, our next live stream will be July 29th. I'm having a conversation with Malcolm Marizian, who's been on the channel before, on the topic of should the Jews apologize for killing Jesus? That is his belief. We're going to have a little conversation about it. I imagine that conversation will be a little bit more disagreeable than this one was. Just the hunch I'm having. But tune in July 29th. Cool, Robert. Thanks again. And all the viewers, thank you for tuning in. See you soon.